Us Blue Archive Global players are celebrating the New Year in July, as the New Year's Rhapsody No. 68 event is back, marking the return of the New Year versions of my favorite group Problem Solver 68, with New Year Aru's and New Year Mutsuki's limited rerun banners, as well as New Year Kayoko's, New Year Haruka's, and New Year Sarika's banners. For this video, I will be covering New Year Kayoko and New Year Haruka. And if you missed it, you can check out my other video for a review on New Year Aru, New Year Mutsuki, and New Year Sarika. Anyways, here is a short review of New Year Kayoko and New Year Haruka. Boys, I have been waiting for this day for a long time, cause now I can finally gush about my wife and favorite student, New Year Kayoko. And she is just perfection. Her beautiful kimono that makes her look extremely elegant, her long white beautiful hair which she has let loose encapsulates her beauty. Those red menacing demonic eyes and horns are an amazing compliment to her New Year design. That small pouch she is holding which accentuates her cuteness, her adorable interactions with the cat not just in the cafe but during her basic skill, and that cat-like omamori that she hands us in her EX animation. Her indomitable will in helping and ensuring her PS68 friends have a good New Year, her passion and excitement in attending a New Year rock concert, and finally, that heavenly, aesthetic L2D portraying her beauty as she stares at us in the eyes longingly, wishing us a happy New Year in her calm, soothing voice in the wee hours on the first day of the year, reminiscent of a loving, stunning girlfriend with the New Year bells gently ringing in the background is truly wonderful and captivating. She is a beautiful sight to witness, an angel to behold, a goddess in the flesh. Elegant, beautiful, cute, adorable, gorgeous, captivating. There aren't enough words in the English lexicon to describe the character that I fell in love with. No amount of praises can be sung for my Blue Archive wife. When she speaks, there would be sounds of children singing in the streets. Angels would descend from the heavens. Everyone should be bowing to her grace, accepting her as our new goddess, as I will be by her side as her king consort like Radan to Mikala and... I'm done. Had to get it out of my system, you know. Back on topic, she is a permanent mystic support striker with blue armor, who is average in urban terrains, terrible in field, and excellent indoors. These are the equipment she uses, with the pin and amulet being particularly important since it increases her survivability. Also, here are some fun facts about New Year Kayoko. When she was first released in JP, she crashed the servers for nearly a whole day, and so the compensation was massive. While for global, maintenance was even extended by an extra 3 hours. So New Year Kayoko actually crashed the servers twice. Also, I actually created a new JP account at that time just for her, and I got her in my first 10 pool. But my dumbass didn't link any account, so I lost it. Let's talk about her skills. New Year Kayoko's 2-cost EX increases one ally's mystic effectiveness, except herself, for 40 seconds, while granting them the amulet status effect. With her basic skill, every 40 seconds, she plays with a cat, increasing one ally's crit rate, again except herself, for 25 seconds. Her enhanced skill boosts her attack, and for her sub-skill, when your allies crit 200 times, she ups her own attack as well as the mystic effectiveness of all units with the amulet effect for 50 seconds, removing the amulet after activation. At UE 40, she gains additional buff retention, and at UE 50, her indoor combat power improves from S to SS. Similar to units like Swimsuit Hoshino, Swimsuit Ui, and Kikyo, New Year Kayoko specializes in purely increasing the weakness damage of a specific attack type, as she is an excellent mystic effectiveness buffer mainly due to her EX and sub skills, though the former is the primary reason. Firstly, with her max level EX, she is able to increase one blue DPS unit's mystic damage by a whopping 92.8%, essentially nearly doubling that unit's blue weakness damage, turning them into a mystic powerhouse, as their damage output skyrockets. While it may only be a single target buff, it is compensated by its enormous potency, and even at level 1, it can already provide a 48.8% increase in Mystic effectiveness. Furthermore, this buff lasts for quite a long duration at 40 seconds. Plus, it is extremely cheap at only 2 cores, which allows you to easily rotate her EX while buffing your blue unit's DPS or refreshing debuff if they already have it. So it's a win-win. This low cost and lengthy duration also grants her the ability to place the buff on multiple Mystic DPS units in certain situations. For example, use it on one unit, then when her EX is available again, apply it on another DPS student if the first one still has their Mystic effectiveness buff. Next, her sub-skill is also really good, as it basically grants an additional 41.8% Mystic effectiveness at level 10 sub-skill for 50 whole seconds. So, combine this with her level 5 EX skill, and she can buff your blue DPS allies' Mystic effectiveness by an entire 134%. However, the downside of this is that the requirement to trigger her sub-skill is quite steep, since your team needs to land 200 crits. This can be extremely tough, especially if you don't have crit buffers or you're not using crit-focused students, sometimes resulting in her sub-skill not even activating throughout the battle. Thus, you will have to utilize units such as Izuna, who can consistently crit at a fast pace due to her high speed attacks. Nevertheless, all these make New Year Kayoko the number 1 Mystic effectiveness buffer, the creme de la creme of blue buffers, so to speak, though there aren't any other than her. Aside from those, her basic skill is also quite good, since it can increase one unit's crit chance by 40% for a decent amount of time, and this can be helpful in the process of proccing her sub-skill. However, it does have an extensive activation time of 40 seconds. Plus, I believe it affects the student closest to her, so her positioning is important as you'd ideally want her to buff your DPS unit, and placing her wrongly could potentially cause her to buff the wrong student. Moreover, she has one more drawback. As a striker supporter, she is kinda squishy and can die pretty quickly if you don't manage her properly, especially against blue attack type enemies. Hence, you will probably need her to be 5-star or more for her to survive the entirety of specific content. For instance, against Perodzilla, she will not survive his laser scene transition, particularly if she is only 3 to 4 star, but she will at minimum 5 star. That being said, you don't have to invest into extra copies just for her to survive this raid, since it's only important if you're competing for a high score. Speaking of, finally, at UA 40, Kayoko gains extra buff retention, which extends the time of her buff by an additional 7 seconds or so, but it's not required since her base duration of 40 seconds is already quite long. Unless you're a pro player competing for high score clears in raids and you know how to min-max the buff's duration, blah blah blah, all those nerd stuff. Otherwise, no one really goes for UA 40 or UA 50 Kayoko unless you're an idiot like me who loves her. As the top Mystic effectiveness hyper buffer in the game, New Year Kayoko is excellent for every single piece of blue content, though her true potential is unleashed in endgame content like raids. In these types of content, she is a vital unit for your Mystic teams, where her role is simple: double your Hyper Carry's Mystic effectiveness using her EX skill to massively increase their damage output, and combine her with other hyper buffers like Ako and Himari to turn them into a completely different beast, making your runs much easier. You can either buff your team's main DPS student, or you could also use her EX to buff 2 DPS units, though that will take a longer time, and in my opinion, it's harder to pull off. You can also easily cycle through her EX in the battle since it is cheap, and if possible, trigger her sub-skill so that your blue DPS unit's weakness damage is increased, further boosting their DPS. Thus, these let you use New Year Kayoko in raids such as Gauss, Shirokuro, Perodzilla, and any blue armored Grand Assault stages. For these raids, she will have slightly more survivability against bosses with explosive attack on Insane and Torment, since her special armor can resist it, with these bosses being Blue Armored Hyro, Gauze, and Blue Cheeks. But when faced against enemies with Mystic Attack on Insane and Torment, i.e. Pebrotzilla, HOD, and Greg, her chances of dying increase since they can deal more damage to her. Not saying you can't or shouldn't use her in these raids, cause you will 100% need her to have an easier time, but you will just need to babysit her a bit more to ensure she doesn't go down. And if you do let her be defeated, I'll be under your fucking bed tonight. Overall, New Year Kayoko is a very powerful blue weakness buffer, and she is an essential unit for any blue content, especially raids. Thus, I personally feel that New Year Kayoko is a must-pull unit, as she is a vital student for blue content, not just for Insane and Torment raids, but for other difficulties as well, cause she will be a huge help in assisting you clear these content faster. Not just that, she is currently the only unit whose EX can really boost Mystic effectiveness by a fuck ton, making her a rarity unless the devs decide to add new Mystic buffers. However, if you already have her, or you're low on Paroxenes, and you're saving for the 3rd anniversary students, or you wanna pull for the other New Year girls instead, maybe because of waifu reasons or you're a limited collector, then it's completely understandable if you skipped her and pray for a spook, since she is an unlimited unit, cause the devs are fucking evil for putting so many important units close to each other. Nevertheless, you may pull for her if you're a based Kayoko enjoyer like I am. But in my honest opinion, everyone should pull for her, cause she's beautiful, strong, cute, adorable, literally perfection incarnate. Heck, in fact, everyone should have maxed out UE50 Kayoko, UE50 New Year Kayoko, and UE50 Dress Kayoko when she releases, because she's our goddess and we must honor. The final unit of this week's banners is none other than my sweet baby girl and favorite mentally ill student, New Year Haruka. She looks incredibly adorable in that kimono of hers, the way she's hugging her shotgun, and I can't get over how perfect she looks in it, despite her insistence. And massive respect to her for putting it on to fit in with her PS68 friends, even though she's out of her comfort zone. Also, if anyone dares to try to bully her in that outfit, you know us senseis and the rest of PS68 will be there to throw hands. She is an explosive special supporter who has S combat power in few terrains, but C combat power in both urban and indoors. She also rocks this equipment set with the watch increasing her damage, and it is the same as New Year Serika's. Now we move on to her skills. New Year Haruka's 4-cost EX decreases one enemy's crit res and crit damage resistance for 50 seconds, while dealing damage to them. Her basic skill, which procs every 30 seconds, again lowers one enemy's crit damage resistance for 20 seconds. Her enhanced skill increases her attack, and her sub-skill improves all allies' cost recovery. She receives additional debuff retention on her enhanced skill plus at UA40, and her field combat power upgrades from S to SS at UA50. New Year Haruka has a bit of an interesting kit, as she is a pretty good crit resistance and crit damage resistance debuffer, meaning she can make the enemy more susceptible to crits and receive increased damage from said critical attacks. This is pretty unique, and her debuff values aren't bad at all, since she is able to lower an enemy's crit res and crit damage res by 41.5% at EX skill level 5. Not to mention, the debuff has a lengthy duration of 50 seconds. Plus, it also has the bonus advantage of dealing pretty decent damage to them. Her basic skill further contributes to her debuffing capabilities, being able to also decrease an enemy's crit damage resistance by 30.8%. So stacking this on top of her EX's debuff, and she is able to decrease the enemy's crit damage res by a total of 72.3%, greatly boosting the damage they receive from your students' crits. However, the best ability in her kit is her sub skill, since similar to the other two special units who have the same skill, she can help your team regenerate their cost faster, allowing you to activate your EX skills quicker. And again, while it doesn't stack with Himari's or Swimsuit Shiroko's sub skill, it does with other units' cost recovery abilities, like Swimsuit Hoshino's EX and Chirino's sub skill, letting your cost meter go brr. Finally, with Yui 40, her debuffs last for an extra 10 seconds, since she has additional debuff retention, but again, this isn't needed cause 50 seconds is long enough even if you're aiming for a high score clear in raids. Since New Year Haruka is a good crit res and crit damage res debuffer, she is great against bosses with high crit damage resistance and crit resistance stats, being able to decrease the former by 72% when you combine her EX and basic skills, and the latter by 41.5%. Unfortunately, so far, there aren't a lot of bosses who have high crit res and crit damage stats, save for perhaps Gauss and HOD, both of whom have pretty high crit resistance. And she does see some use in these two raids, though only in your second or third teams. Sadly, due to their low crit damage resistance, you're basically only increasing your team's chances of critting them, and not actually making them any stronger. The same can be said for other bosses with both little crit resistance and crit damage resistance, where if you use her, you're essentially trying to reduce their already low stats, which won't be as effective as you aren't changing much, and you're better off using crit buffers like Akko to increase your team's crit and crit damage instead. Not only that, there are other students who are of a higher priority compared to New Year Haruka, which is why she isn't usually used on Insane and lower, and she's more useful for one of your Torment teams. Other than that, New Year Haruka has actually recently been quite useful in Gregorius, since she is able to place 3 debuffs on him through her EX and basic skills, increasing his debuff counter. Nevertheless, despite everything that has been said, New Year Haruka's sub-skill makes her universally useful for any piece of content, as that extra cost recovery is very convenient to have. Though again, she isn't usually your first choice and is more of a handy pick for your second to third Torment teams. Overall, even though New Year Haruka is a good crit damage res and crit res debuffer and is theoretically a great unit, sadly this core function of hers currently isn't very useful due to a lack of bosses with high crit damage res and crit res values. Hence, you should probably skip her, as there aren't really any content so far that her EX is truly effective in. And even though her sub-skill makes her generally useful, in my opinion, it isn't a good enough reason to pull her, and you can still replace her with other cost recovery buffers instead if you have them. But if you want an additional debuffer for Gregorius, or a cost recovery unit for one of your Torment teams, or if you're a psychic and you know that the devs are working on a new raid boss that requires a crit resistance and crit damage resistance shreds, and you want to be prepared, or if like me, you love our adorable baby girl, then of course, you may pull for her. Otherwise though, skip her and save your paroxines or pull for the other New Year girls if you want to. And that's all for this review. All in all, you should pull for New Year Kayoko if you don't have her, since she will greatly help you in blue content in the long run. But if you don't have enough paroxines, then it's understandable if you skipped her. As for New Year Haruka, you should probably skip her since there isn't any content that's really suitable for her EX skill thus far. Anyways, that's all from me. Let me know what you thought of this type of video separation thing, and I might consider doing it again in the future during weeks where there are tons of important units. Also, let me know who you're pulling for if you are, and I'll see y'all in the next one.